Hey there, Kipsters. We're looking at objectives 1B.3 through 4. That's adding and subtracting like fractions and finding their common denominator, or their least common denominator. We're going to start with adding and subtracting like fractions. And just to be clear, when we say like fractions, we mean fractions that have the same denominator. So, for example, if I have 3/4 and 1/4, I know that those are like fractions because they have the same denominator. So in all these examples, I'm going to either find the sum or difference between like fractions, fractions with the same denominator. So I have 4/9 and 2/9. If I'm going to subtract or add fractions that are like, they have the same denominator, I know the denominator is going to stay the same. The only thing that's going to change is the numerator, and I subtract the numerators, 4 minus 2. And that's how I would subtract like fractions. I'm going to do one more example that's slightly more complicated because you see, in this example, I have 1 2/3 plus 1/3. And so I'm adding a mixed number and a proper fraction, both of which have the same denominator of 3. In order to do that, I'm going to just bring my 1 over. I know that there's going to be 1 whole there. And then I'm going to add my fractions like I had just discussed. I have 2/3 plus 1/3, so I might know my denominator is going to be thirds. I add my numerators, which is going to be 3/3. So I have 1 whole and 3/3. Really, that means I have 1 whole and 3/3 is another whole. So in total, this is 2. So you have to be able to use your fraction skills and knowledge of fractions to be able to solve more complex problems like this. Okay, I'd like you to try these two. Stop the video here, press play when you're ready to check your answer. Okay, you've tried these. 3/7 plus 2/7 have the same denominator. They are like fractions, so you know your sum is going to have 7ths in it. 3 plus 2 is 5. Your answer for C should have been 5/7. Give yourself a check if you got that. D was a little bit more complicated because you had, again, a mixed number like 2 3/4 plus a like fraction 3/4. Just like last time, I'll bring my whole number over and I know that there's going to be 2 there. And then I have to add 3/4 plus 3/4. 3/4 plus 3/4 are like fractions, so my denominator will be 4. 3 plus 3 is 6. This one's a little trickier to simplify because you're not done yet. You have an improper fraction here and you want to turn that into a proper fraction. So the first thing you need to realize is that 6/4 is the same thing as 1 2/4. So really you have 2 plus 1 2/4. And together that would be 3 2/4, which would simplify to 3 1/2. So a completely simplified answer should have been 3 1/2. Okay. Now, we've practiced adding and subtracting fractions that are like. That means they have the same denominator. But in the next video, you're going to see fractions that don't have the same denominator, and we're going to have to figure out how to add or subtract them. In order to do that, the very first step is to find the least common denominator. That means to find the smallest denominator that both fractions have in common. So I'll rewrite the fractions. I have this fraction 3/4 and 5/6. I'm going to want to find the least common denominator, which means the smallest denominator that these two fractions have in common. So there's 2 ways that I've seen a lot of students do this. One is just to list out the multiples of 4 and 6 until I find what they have in common. So that would be 4, 8, 12, 16. And then 6, 12, 18, 24. And you should see that already we found the least common denominator. That's definitely one way that works. But with numbers that don't have a smaller least common denominator, you could sometimes go on for a very long time. So another method we looked at was the cake method, where you have 4 and 6, and you're going to divide these numbers by prime numbers until you can't divide them anymore. I can divide 4 and 6 by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. I can't divide 2 or 3 into anything, so I'm already done. And these three numbers that make the L will tell me what my least common denominator is. 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 3 is 12, and so my least common denominator would be 12. You have two different ways to solve that same problem. So for this example, the LCD we were looking for was 12. Okay, using either method that you would like, please find the least common denominator between 3/4 Wait, let me change this problem so it's not the exact one that we just did. Please find the least common denominator between 5/6 and 4/9. Go ahead and stop the video here. Press play when you're ready to check your answer. Okay, you tried this problem B. 5/6 and 4/9. So you had 6 and 9ths. You could have listed out your multiples. That would have been 6, 12, 18, 9, 18. You would have found the least common denominator was 18. Or you could have used the cake method. If you're dividing 6 and 9, the number that goes into both of them is 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 9 divided by 3 is 3. If you multiply all these numbers together, 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 3 is 18. And again, you would have found that the least common denominator was 18. So again, 18 should have been your answer. If you got that, give yourself a check. Okay, the last slide for this video is rewriting fractions after we found the least common denominator. So what we're going to do is rewrite the fractions that we just saw, 3/4 and 5/6, with their least common denominator. If you remember on the last slide, we found that 3/4 and 5/6, the least common denominator between these two fractions was 12. So I want to rewrite both of these fractions with a denominator of 12. So to do that, I'll write them on top of each other just because I think it helps organize this information a little more easily. And I know that I want to have both of these fractions with a denominator of 12. Then I think about what fancy one do I need to multiply to get there. I know 4 times 3 would be 12, so that means I would multiply the numerator also times 3. 3 times 3 would be 9, and my first fraction would be rewritten as 9/12. I know 6 times 2 would get me 12, so for the second fraction I would have to multiply the numerator and denominator by 2, so that's a fancy one. And 5 times 2, this would rewrite as 10/12. Okay. I'd like you to rewrite both of these fractions, which I'm going to change to the ones we saw on the last slide. I think we said 5/6 and 4/9. 5/6 and 4/9. I want you to rewrite both of these with their least common denominator. Remember that when we found the least common denominator of both of these fractions, we said that the least common denominator was 18. Okay, you rewrite them, stop the video here, check your answer after you've tried it yourself. Okay, you've tried B, now it's time to check your answer. If you have 5/6 and 4/9, you want both of them with a denominator of 18. With a denominator of 18. That first fraction you would have had to multiply times 3/3. And you would have had 15/18. That second fraction you would have had to multiply times 2/2. And that would have given you 8/18. If you had both of those fractions correct, give yourself a check on your paper. Good job. Now it's time for independent practice. I'd like you to try these problems, practicing all the skills you've seen in slides 1, 2, and 3. Stop the video here. After you're done, if you answered these correctly, you should be ready to retake assessment Objective Assessment 3B.3 through 4. Go ahead and get started. Good luck.